Welcome back to the MovieBabble Podcast. This week you've got myself, and I'm joined by Brennan as we talk about kind of the nothingness going on the box office still, as well as some of Netflix's top movies, including one of our favorites that made the list this week, and followed by just some of what we've been watching. And you can now check us out online at just moviebabble.com. You can still check us out at MovieBabble Reviews, but that's not as cool or as catchy. But yeah, check us out at moviebabble.com, where we've got more written content and podcasts like this. But other than that, let's go ahead and jump in. So the box office still pretty much doesn't exist. Some theaters are opening up a little bit across the country. I know a lot of drive-ins have opened up at this point. I know for me personally, there's just like a little mom and pop, one of a kind theater chain. I think it's like a four, maybe 5 screen theater opening up this week. But I don't think we'll really see any big theaters start to open up until the chains can do so nationally, just all at once. So there's really not a ton going on, but there is still a little bit going on in the box office, just because you do have some of those smaller theaters that are open, and in places where, they didn't really go into a full national shutdown, you still have small stuff like that popping up. So The Wretched is at a 5-week reign, which is kind of the first movie to really have a top number 1 spot since Birds of Prey, which feels like years ago, but was back in February. So now The Wretched pulled in, obviously it's not going to be pulling in $1 million weekends, but it's, pulled in a daily of over 20,000 on Thursday. And it's just pulling in a little bit, even if it's not pulling in anything great, sitting at about 335,000 overall.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a movie that I don't know too much about it, but I feel like it's kind of odd that a movie like this is just kind of, I guess, doing as well as it's doing. I mean, I guess it's just because there really is nothing out there to watch at the moment. Funny too, because you can kind of track the theater count for The Wretched, and it's I don't really know too much what the movie's about. I know that there's someone in it that has to face off against a witch or something like that. I'm not too familiar, but they're definitely capitalizing on being the only really available new option at theaters. But most of this is definitely drive-in. So you go to like May 1st, and this film was only in 12 theaters. Fast forward to May 10, it's up to 19. The week after that, it's up to 21, and now officially with the Memorial Day weekend last weekend, it's up to about 59 theaters. So I mean, drive-ins definitely are a big part of it. And as you said, yeah, it's made hundreds of thousands of dollars now. I mean, last weekend it was able to turn about 180 for Memorial Day. It's just kind of weird, and as you said, it's first place at the box office technically, and weirdly enough, it now has a 5-week reign at the top of the box office, and the last movie to have a 5-week reign at the top of the box office was Black Panther a couple of years ago. So I mean, I don't think we'll be talking about The Wretched as kind of a movie that has made quite an impact like Black Panther, but I mean, it's definitely a funny little thing to note.
Maybe this is the next Avatar, because Avatar didn't really open up just incredible numbers, but it just kept reigning at the box office just for weeks and weeks and weeks. So maybe The Wretched, it's only at about $659,000 worldwide right now, but you give it another year with everybody in quarantine, this could be something. I don't want to call it now, but I'm calling it now.
No, I could see that. I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah, so there's not really anything going on at the box office, which nobody really expected it to. Tenet is still somewhat solid on that July release date, so we have basically a month and a half, maybe week more, week less, but basically a month and a half till we get there. So we'll see whether or not the box office really returns in the summer, or if we're waiting really till August, till the end of the summer season, for the box office to come back.
Yeah, it might be a little while. I mean, you said personally you have kind of a smaller independently owned theater opening near you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even for me, I know that the bigger theater chains around where I live, there's no real independent theaters in the area where I'm at currently, but I do know that the government has just approved for drive-in theaters to open up. So I know a bunch of them are gearing up to get ready to open up next week. So I mean that's something, and I don't even remember if I've ever been to a drive-in theater. So I think that might be a good experience, definitely to check that out and maybe support the Wretched in its crusade to become the next Avatar.
Yeah, no, the drive-in by my house has been playing The Invisible Man and Trolls World Tour for the past couple weeks. So I wouldn't be surprised if theaters kind of pull some of what was already in theaters when everything shut down for their opening slates, or if I'm just really hoping that they get a little more experimental and do some classic movies or movie marathons and whatnot. But that may not be the case.
I agree with you. I think that'd be a fun thing to do, like an interesting and entertaining way to celebrate theaters opening up again, playing some classic films. I believe we have touched on this a little bit, but I mean, I think everything is just kind of leading towards that July 17th tentative release date for Tenet. It's funny because Christopher Nolan has been such a proponent of theaters and going to the movie theater and just that shared experience. And a lot of his films, I mean, he's able to make hundreds of millions of dollars with his original ideas, which is quite rare in film, kind of in this day and age. But the funny thing is, I think 2020 has definitely set up Christopher Nolan to be I feel like this is almost his dream in a sense, because you have the coronavirus hit and it's tragic and it's awful, and the theaters are shut down, and that part of the industry is hurting. But Christopher Nolan seems to be, I mean, Tenet might be the first big movie, so he might be like the knight in shining armor for cinemas. I mean, it just seems like that's kind of what we're gearing up towards. But if Tenet gets postponed, then I mean, it's definitely going to hurt.
Yeah, and especially because it's going to push Wonder Woman back. Because I mean, we've basically lost the summer box office at this point, right? But Tenet is kind of the holdout to kind of keep that alive and really keep everything going after that. And I think we'll see August is already pretty full, but I think we'll see everything kind of stick firm because a lot of the movies are all tentative right at this point. And I think if Tenet can hold firm, then we'll see everything kind of cemented, and we'll get the summer box office in the fall, which will be really interesting just to see how everything plays out.
Definitely. I mean, it's yeah. No, I agree with that. I think we'll see how it plays out. But as long as people are safe and there are good safety measures and health officials can be sure that things go about kind of in a safe manner, then I think that we'll be good.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, I'm excited to see it up on the big screen. I just want to get back in a theater, man. That's all I really want.
Yeah, the withdrawals have definitely. I mean, it's past withdrawals now. Like it's just full-fledged missing the theaters.
It's just I'm just jonesing for even a bad movie. I will go watch even Rise of Skywalker again if it's playing. Like I just need this. I just need to see something, man.
Yeah, you just want to know that theater still exists. You want to know that they're there.
Yeah. Well, there was actually another new release this week, which I didn't even know it existed until I saw a trailer for it on YouTube, like the day before it launched. That is The High Note, which dropped on video on demand. And it's actually had pretty positive critical reviews overall, sitting at about a 70% on Rotten Tomatoes. But it's Dakota Johnson and Tracy Ellis Ross, and from what I understand, it's a rom-com about some people in the music industry, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about this movie. I know that I saw the trailer for it in theaters, I think back in February, and I was looking forward to it. I thought it might be a fun little thing. There are a lot of people in there that I like. I know, I believe Ice Cube's in this movie as well, and as you said, Kelvin Harrison Jr. I mean, he's a great talent. It's kind of nice to see him in a rom com, especially after. I mean, I remember him actually saying that the reason he went for this movie is because last year he was in two very serious films with Loose and Waves. So I mean, this is a good way for him to kind of switch it up a little early in his career. But they were originally going to come out May 8th, this film in theaters, but dropped on VOD the other day. We'll see how it does. I feel like it might be another prime test for VOD, because we've had films like Capone, we've had films like Scoob, very different movies. I think The high note falls somewhere in between as kind of being a rom-com. So we'll see how it performs on VOD.
Yeah, and I feel like, some of the bigger successes we've seen with VOD so far have been children and family movies. Just kind of touching on what you're talking about. And, I don't know if we'll see anything that just kind of breaks away outside of that. So I'm just curious to see how this fares because, other movies that were kind of similar to this, like The Lovebirds, moved to Netflix or moved to Amazon. And so it's just curious that for this movie, they chose to continue with video on demand instead of just taking the quick paycheck and selling to a streaming service.
No, definitely, I agree. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but it seems like the smart move.
Yeah, I think so too. So that pretty much sums up the new releases. Again, there's not a whole lot releasing just because there's not a whole lot to, or not many places to go and see new releases anyways. So we'll move on and touch on some of Netflix's top 10. There's a very exciting, actually two very exciting movies for me on this list. The first one's a movie that we've talked about a lot on the Babble Pod. That is Uncut Gems, which landed on Netflix in the US last week. I believe in Canada and internationally, it's actually been on since like January or February. But for all the Americans, it's here. I've had a couple friends watch it for the first time this week, and they just text me afterwards like, man, like what just happened? And now the whole world can really experience the greatness that is Uncut Gems.
Yeah, so I was looking forward to. I saw this movie like way back at the inception of it, back at TIFF in September, and I loved it. And I was excited for it to come to theaters in December. I remember even in October, one of my local theaters had like a poster for it up. But then I found out that Netflix was purchasing the rights for it internationally, whereas A24 was going to distribute it in the US. But ultimately, I did get to catch it in theaters again because a few independent theaters were playing it, and a few theaters in downtown Toronto were playing it. So I did get to catch it in theaters before it dropped on Netflix in January. But now, finally, everyone in the US can experience this at home. I mean, it was quite successful at theaters. I mean, I think it made $50 million. That might be the highest grossing A24 movie in North America. I think because it made 50 million in the US, didn't really hit theaters elsewhere. I think that is the highest grossing A24 movie, if I'm not mistaken, just in the US. But now that it's on Netflix, I mean, it's definitely gonna expand its audience and expand its fan base. And I mean, we'll see. I mean, this is the movie I think that's ripe to become sort of a cult hit.
Yeah, I think this is a movie that a lot of people heard about when it first came out, but whether they just didn't want to pay for it to go see it in theaters or, a lot of people were upset by how much cursing there was in the movie. It was kind of on the horizon for people. And now that, it's easy to access, most people are still stuck at home. I think this movie is really going to blow up, kind of in the way like Community has on Netflix within the past couple months.
Yeah, I mean, first place now, Uncut Gems this week in the US on Netflix. I mean, we'll see if that holds. It probably will, but this is a movie that definitely holds a lot of intrigue, I think, and I think there's a lot of potentially even replay value in there because, I mean, if you even enjoy it, I mean, if you're turned off by, I guess, some of the language in it, or just kind of the constant swearing, or even just the jarring kind of sound mix of this film, you could be turned off by that. But I think if you get past that, or if there are other people that enjoy that aspect of it, like you and I think that this is a movie that holds a solid amount of replay value because there's a lot of great moments within it. It's quite funny as well. So I think that it does hold that replay value, and it will continue to hold on to the Netflix top 10 for a while.
Yeah, and I think especially as word of mouth just continues to grow with people watching it here in this first week, I think it's going to be stick around for quite a while. We've seen that with a lot of like these larger movies that have landed on Netflix in the past couple of weeks as well. But I think it's also important to note that Adam Sandler has a hand in the top 3 movies on Netflix right now. So you got Uncut Gems at number 1 in the US, followed by Just Go With It, followed by The Wrong Missy. So he stars in the first 2 and then is producer on the third. So Sandler and Netflix are making each other happy.
Yeah, no, yeah, 100%. I mean, Like we talk about this man so much, but it's just it's so funny now that these last 5 years or so he's just kind of become Netflix's like machine. I mean, like he's just huge now with Netflix, and he has that 8 movie deal that he's still trying to get through. There's another Happy Madison movie coming out later this year. So I mean, like him and Netflix are now go pretty much hand in hand.
Yeah, it's a match made in, I don't want to say heaven, but it's a match. Other than that, kind of got your usual spread in the Netflix top 10. We got The Lovebirds, number 4, which just released last week. Despicable Me has just constantly been in the top 10, as well as The Grinch. I still don't fully understand why people are watching that midsummer. But I think the biggest movie that's on everybody's minds is Norm of the North, Family Vacation, which has just apparently exploded.
Oh my gosh! Like Norm of the North, like this is like a cult following type deal here. This Norm of the North stuff. Is this the sequel?
This is the 3rd sequel, from what I understand.
Oh my God! Like that first movie, I remember. Like I don't really remember it that well, but I remember a little bit of it. I mean, it's just so weird that it spawned a trilogy now.
Yeah, I remember working at the movie theater when this movie came out, and like we just wouldn't play it half the time because we didn't have anybody actually watching it when the first one came out. It had a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes for quite some time when it released. I think that's since changed, but this movie was just like horribly bad. But the thing is, they only spent 18 million on the original film, and so it made a box office haul of 30 million, which means it probably didn't lose just a ton of money. But apparently, just like Netflix and all these video on demand services have just run away and given it 3 sequels because they hate everyone, apparently.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's odd. It's odd. It reminds me of the other film we were talking about with the dogs. Do you remember the name of it?
Arctic Dogs.
Arctic
It's a
Dogs.
classic.
Yes. What a classic.
Yeah, so they Norm of the North actually had 2 sequels last year, one in June and one in January of 2019. And then this sequel, which released on DVD in February of this year and is now on Netflix, to many parents around the country's horror.
I feel like this is like yeah, to many parents around the country's horror. I feel like this is a franchise that Netflix should just say, you know what, we'll finance you low budget, make like a little kid show and put it on the kids section on Netflix or something like that.
Yeah, it kind of feels like something that Nickelodeon would pick up and just kind of do exactly what you're saying, just like make a bunch of little, 20-minute TV show episodes out of it. And who knows? Maybe the Nickelodeon Netflix deal that's coming together will include that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Norm of the North.
Yeah, but that pretty much sums up what's going on with Netflix. Not a lot of change outside of those 2 things. HBO Max also dropped this past week and has been pretty loaded. It's got a lot of classics, which is what kind of drew me to it. So they have Turner Classic Movies and Criterion are both part of the streaming service. It doesn't have everything that the Criterion channel has, but it does have quite a bit of the bigger stuff. So there's a lot of like Bergman. Most of the old Godzilla films are on there. The original King Kong is on the streaming service. It is actually really loaded. I watched the 1938 Adventures of Robin Hood the other day, and I just had a great time. Like that was just so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, I like HBO Max is not in it's not in Canada sadly, but I mean the library that they have just looks incredible. I've seen so many people post pictures of what they're watching and what's on there. I mean, it looks good, and I know I don't think Nolan's trilogy's on there, but I know that a lot of the other DC films throughout the years are on there. I mean, I think Burton's Batmans are on there, which is something I've always wanted to revisit as of late. But no, there's a great library on there, a lot of classics.
Yeah, so there was actually an issue where some of the stuff that they advertised and like they had specifically in promos for HBO Max to be available at launch. Some of those movies weren't available, so particularly Nolan's trilogy, the second Hobbit movie. So they have the first and the third Hobbit movie on the service, but not the second one. I don't fully understand that. And then there aren't any Superman movies either, which I think was something that they kind of showed off with the DC Universe service that's also a part of owned by Warner Brothers and a part of HBO Max supposedly. But a lot of that content was missing as well. So they pulled a lot of the advertisements and claims for that earlier this week when people noticed that you couldn't watch The Dark Knight or The Desolation of Smaug.
Another thing that they have is the Harry Potter, all the Harry Potter films, and I remember like as recent as like a day before the Harry Potter, or sorry, a day before HBO Max launched, they didn't even have the rights to that. So I guess they really did some quick last minute work to get the Harry Potter films, but that's definitely a big add to the streaming service.
And I think we saw some of this with Disney Plus as well. And I think Disney Plus did a little bit better of a job because a lot of these bigger movies that weren't on the service, like I believe that both National Treasures weren't on at launch. There were some other movies like Prince of Persia and whatnot that weren't available at launch. The Disney did a good job of saying, hey, we don't have this, but here's the date it's coming. And I think that's just kind of indicative of the fact that none of these big streaming services had ever really planned on putting a streaming service together when they were putting these movies out. And so the rights were all over the place, and even a few years ago, like Disney's Star Wars movies and the later Marvel movies were all on Netflix because nobody really planned for these production companies to have their own outlet. And so I think that's why we're seeing the gaps that we're seeing right now. It's just because nobody planned on it. And then suddenly that was the plan. And they realized they didn't have access to as much of their content as they thought they would have.
Yeah, no, for sure, it's interesting. But I mean, do you think that they pose a threat to? I mean, Netflix we know is secure, but do you think they pose somewhat of a threat to other streaming services that are trying to make a play at Netflix?
I think not really, because I think like the biggest competition now would be something like Hulu, but Disney owns that and has packaged that with Disney Plus a ton. I think like more of where you're going to see stuff falling by is some of these smaller like cable channels like Showtime or Stars, who just can't compete with all these conglomerates that are coming together. Because with between Disney Plus and Fox, or Disney Plus and Hulu, you have all of Disney and Fox's content for the most part. HBO is pulling a lot of Warner Brothers and Universal. So I think it's going to be these smaller kind of holdovers from the cable era that are going to struggle the most.
Yeah, okay. That's definitely a good assessment, but they definitely have the library to kind of flex some might, and I think, I mean, they're definitely going to be successful. I'm excited to see what like their first month subscription total is potentially if they do disclose that information, but it'll be very interesting.
And I think the biggest comment I've seen from people with HBO Max is, with Netflix, you have way more content than anybody else. Like Netflix just has ridiculous amounts of contents that they're either producing and releasing or that they've got the streaming rights to. But HBO Max feels a lot more curated. It's a lot more stuff you'll recognize, a lot bigger names, especially with all their classic movies and, bringing in Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings trilogy and, Batman and Superman. And so I think that's going to be a bigger appeal as, Netflix may have more that you can watch, but HBO Max is going to have more that you want to watch and that you're going to go out of your way to this service to watch.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it.
So that's HBO Max, and then I finally finished the James Bond marathon this week, and let me tell you, that was a struggle. I think I started in December, and then because the Bond movies are always being shifted around the streaming services. I think they were all on Netflix when I started in December, and they were all off Netflix, and then they slowly kind of started popping up on Amazon Prime. And so like I worked my way through it. I took a break right before quarantine started because I just couldn't handle it anymore. I know a lot of the people that grew up with Bond movies love the Roger Moore era, but I was just so bored and so exhausted with all the goofiness. I just couldn't take it anymore. But last week I decided to buckle down and watched the final two Roger Moore era films, and then made my way all through the Craig films. And I still don't like the Roger Moore era, um, but I really loved the Timothy Dalton era. It felt kind of ahead of its time because it was like really gritty for the mid to late 80s. And it's certainly a lot grittier even than like the Pierce Brosnan era, which is just super CGI'd and just way over the top. Like the final villain in the Brosnan era has basically created a Death Star, and that's kind of the plot of that movie. But I think like overall, most of the movies were fun. Like they're definitely problematic. Like in the Sean Connery era, there are multiple instances where like he's kissing a woman and then he sees a bad guy coming at him. So like in Goldfinger, he throws this woman that he's kissing into this bad guy's punch. And at one point later in the franchise, he just like throws this woman in front of a bullet and she just dies and he leaves the room. It's like they definitely have their problems, but I think most of them are pretty fun. I really love the Dalton era. I think the Craig era was a breath of fresh air, even though I think it's pretty hit and miss because you have Skyfall and Casino Royale, they're way at the top, and then you have Quantum of Solace and Spectre that just kind of feel off. But I think overall, I'm glad I watched them all once. I probably won't watch most of them ever again, but I did it.
Congratulations. I didn't realize that there were so many misses in the Bond franchise. I haven't watched too many of the older movies. Um, I think I've watched all the Craig movies. I don't know if I've seen Quantum of Solace, but the other three I have. Um, but a lot of the older movies I don't really recall watching, especially that Roger Moore era that people so highly revere. But I mean, it might be something that I start, but I mean, your kind of rhetoric towards it makes me hesitant.
Yeah, and I think I probably would have enjoyed it more if I wasn't setting out to watch all of them. It's pretty daunting. There's 7 Roger Moore era movies, and when you're in a marathon, you're like, all right, well, I'm looking at the whole franchise and not just at this movie by movie, and I just kind of got exhausted with it. And I mean, it applies to a lot of the earlier Bond movies. Is the formula is pretty much the same, um, but I will say like the music for all the movies is really great. Like I always kind of knew there were, songs that came out of the Bond movies that were pretty popular. Like I think "Live and Let Die" is probably the most popular one. So that was nice, and I had fun with a lot of the gadgets and kind of the campiness of the action sometimes. But I definitely would recommend spacing them out a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's probably a good idea. I mean, right now, No Time to Die is set for November, so I feel like I could even watch one per week. I mean, there's probably times you could do like two in a week, and kind of spread it out. I don't know, but I mean, we'll see. It's weird how many misses they have, but I mean, when you have a franchise with over 20 movies, you're bound to have a few misses.
Yeah, and it's so I didn't watch the first Casino Royale, which is a spoof, but I did watch Never Say Never Again, which is not part of the canon, but it sort of is, just because like the Bond movies were plagued with legal troubles, basically until 2015 when they finally settled permanently. But it came to be that uh, Kevin McClory, who had originally helped write Thunderball, the novel, and the screenplay, like had the rights specifically to that story, and so they got Sean Connery to return like 12 years after he'd retired. So his second time coming out of retirement, and it's got a very cool shark fighting sequence where it's hard to like they didn't use CGI and like you can see him like actually getting up close and fighting the shark. It's like really cool to watch. But I did enjoy that one, even if it maybe doesn't count as part of the franchise, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, so maybe I'll throw that one in there as well, just because it's just because it's fun. I mean, you need something a little bit lighthearted to go with all this goofy Bondness.
Yeah, I will say the movies that have sharks in them are better than the Bond movies that don't have sharks in them. Just like you turn on the movie and there's one movie that like 10 minutes in you already see sharks, and I was like, all right, like I'm here for this one.
It's gonna be a good time.
But yeah, that's kind of what I've been watching this week. And then I just after watching so much Sean Connery, I was like, you know what, I kind of want to watch Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Watch that tonight, or watch that last night. It's always a good time. But what have you been watching?
So for me, I finished up watching the new Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, which is it kind of chronicles I mean, this isn't a movie per se, but it is a miniseries. But it chronicles the 1998 kind of his last season with the Chicago Bulls. Incredible miniseries for sure. I know in the US it was kind of premiering on ESPN every Sunday. They were showing 2 episodes a week for 5 weeks. However, internationally, Netflix was releasing 2 episodes a week for 5 weeks. So I pretty much wrapped that up and decided to watch Space Jam afterwards. It's on Netflix here, and I mean, I know that's a movie that has such a nostalgic kind of following. I mean, I know a lot of people that grew up watching that movie. I mean, they're so nostalgic towards it, with the Toon Squad and the Monstars. But honestly, watching it now, I mean, I still enjoy it. I think it's funny. It's lighthearted. I think it's fine for what it's going for. But I mean, it's a wacky movie. I mean, I don't know. It's not great. It's not really good, but it is still fun to watch, especially after finishing up with the documentary, because the weirdly enough, Space Jam's sort of a biopic with Looney Tunes thrown in.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I've seen Space Jam, but I know I didn't see it until I was still a kid, but more of an older kid, so I didn't really grow up with it a ton. So I don't have as much fondness as a lot of people seem to have. But I'm sure I'll get around to it when the sequel comes out.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the sequel. The funny thing is, I know that first one is a classic even to a lot of people. Just like it's like a childhood classic. But I think the sequel definitely has potential to actually. And I don't know. I don't want to step on toes here because I love. I mean, I love Michael Jordan. I love the original. I think it's funny. It's not a good movie, but I think it's fun. But I think this sequel has a potential to actually be good in a way because you have Ryan Coogler attached to it. I think he's writing the script for it. So I don't know. I mean, I don't expect it to be great, but I expect there to actually be some potential.
Yeah. I think Looney Tunes movies have been pretty hit and miss. I kind of grew up with Looney Tunes Back in Action a lot, and I just caught like 20 minutes of it a couple months ago, and I was like, why did I ever like this? So I hope Cooler can kind of bring it to another level. And I mean, you've got LeBron James, Don Cheadle's attached to the movie, I believe. So you've got some pretty good players there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if there's a kind of backlash because people are like, no, this is not my Space Jam. But I think that it's kind of time for it, especially considering the debate is always who's the greatest of all time between those two. I think that it's deserving for LeBron James to get the lead role in the updated Space Jam. So I mean, it'll be interesting for sure.
Yeah, I think so. But other than that kind of wraps up what little is going on at the box office this weekend, as well as some Netflix movies. If you haven't seen Uncut Gems, check that out. Other than that, we'll be back next week talking about more movies, talking about what we've been watching. And remember, you can always check us out online at MovieBabble.com.